Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay. And so thank you for attending this embargoed virtual press briefing on the impact of COVID-19 on youth education, jobs, rights, and mental well-being. My name is Rosalind Yard, and I'm Chief of News and Media at the ILO. And with us today are Sang-On Lee, Director of the ILO's Employment Policy Department, Felix Weidenkopf, Employment Specialist from Bangkok, Marcus Pilgrim, Head of the ILO's office in Budapest, which covers countries in Central and Eastern Europe, Caroline Njuki, Program Manager from Nairobi, and Susana Puerto, Specialist Employment and Labour Market Policies of the ILO. You'll find their names in the media advisory we sent you yesterday. You should also have received the press release, executive summary, and reports in English, French, and Spanish. Please make sure that your media outlet is added to your names in the participants list. And all journalists' mics will be muted and controlled by our technician. As you know, just raise the hand icon to indicate that you have a question, and we will go down the list, unmute your mic and give you the floor. And we'll take one question at a time. But if you have a follow-on question, please include it with your original question. Regional journalists who are watching this on our YouTube live stream link can send questions to newsroom@ilo.org. We will answer these as soon as possible after the briefing. And just a reminder that this is an embargoed press briefing, and the embargo will lift this evening at 2000 Geneva time, which is 1800 GMT. Now, Sang-On Lee, Director of the ILO's Employment Policy Department, will now begin the briefing with an overview of the main findings of the report. Then we'll open the floor for your questions. Sang-On, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rosalind. Good afternoon. I hope all of you are actually keeping well and safe in this difficult time. Thank you for joining the virtual launch of our report, Youth and COVID-19, Impacts on Youth Employment, Education, and Rights and Well-being. This report reflects the experiences and concerns and aspirations of young people captured by an online global survey, which was conducted between April and May of this year, when the pandemic had rapidly turned into a social and economic crisis. The findings are based on the over 12,000 responses from 112 countries, with a large proportion coming from educated youth and those with internet access. For this reason, it is important to note the survey population is representative of students and educated working youth ages between 18 and 29. Following the standard procedure, of course, we have corrected any possible major sampling biases, including through using population-related weighting schemes. As the subtitle of the report suggests, we focus on the impact of COVID-19 on 4 key areas: education and training, employment, mental well-being, and rights. So let me present the main findings to you. First is about the education and training. The survey shows that 3 out of the 4 young students and youth are combining study and work. 3 out of 4 of them experienced school closures, yet not all were able to make transition to online and distance learning. In fact, COVID-19 left 1 in 8 young students without any access to education or training. Youth in lower income countries in particular were badly affected by the disruption in education. Notably, 65% of youth in high income countries were taught classes via video lectures, compared to 55% in middle income countries and 18% in low income countries. These figures underline the deep digital divide between the regions. Across the globe, many schools and training institutions made all possible efforts to provide continuity in education by transitioning to an online or distance delivery. However, a student's experience with online learning was not always positive. 65% of young people studying, they reported that they learned less since the pandemic began. As a result, 51% believed their education may be delayed, and 9% feared their education might fail. Second, what is about the employment? The overall findings are not positive either, and in fact, they are quite worrisome. In May, the ILO reported that 1 in 6 youth in the survey had stopped working since the outbreak of the coronavirus. Our recent analysis elaborated further on the groups of young people who are particularly faced with the high risk of the job losses. They include, first, younger workers aged 18 to 24 who had a limited work experience and were engaged in entry jobs. The second, youth working in the clerical sport and services and sales and crafts. Lockdowns and social distancing measures may explain why young salesmen and women or young workers reliant on business remain open were hit harder. Yet it's important to remember the risk is not just about the job losses. Even for those who actually remain employed after the onset of the pandemic, the working hours fell by nearly a quarter. And 2 out of 5 young people reported a reduction in their incomes. So young people in the lower income countries are the most exposed to reductions in working hours and income losses. Therefore, the current crisis creates the shocks on the both demand and supply for young people, which is a very distinctive feature of this crisis compared to the previous crisis such as the Great Recession 2007 and 9. And third, given all these worrying effects in the areas of the education, training, and employment, and also considering that the young people navigated these difficult realities, it is not surprising at all that their mental well-being suffered a lot. Our study finds that 17% of young people are probably affected by anxiety and depression. Mental well-being is lowest for young women and younger youth between ages of the 18 and 24. Young people whose education or the work was either disrupted or had stopped altogether were almost twice as likely to be affected by anxiety and depression as those who managed to continue to be employed. Fourth, on the top of these three, and there is another important concern which has not attracted much attention in policies and media. This is about the rights. Indeed, young people's perception on their human rights demonstrate how the pandemic has permitted all aspects of their lives. 1 in 3 young people noticed a marked impact on their rights to participate in public affairs, while over a quarter experienced difficulties in exercising their rights to freedom of religion or belief. Again, about a quarter of young people felt the misinformation around the pandemic was in fact limiting their rights of the access to information. The basic needs were also an issue too. For the fifth of youth, especially the ones out of the work, their rights to housing was being challenged as they suggested they are struggled to make ends meet. Let me add the one positive news to this devastating development for youth, which is about the young people's commitments to our society. Our survey clearly shows that despite all the hardship the young people are going through themselves, they are still very determined to step up and partner safely and effectively to build back better. Over 1 in 4 reported actively engaging in volunteerism and making donations towards the COVID-19 responses. We believe this is very important. That's why our report includes numerous inspiring statements from young people which came out of our survey. So in conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic has a systematic, deep, and disproportionate impact on young people. We find that young women, younger youth, and those from the low-income countries among the hardest hit. Unless the urgent action is taken, young people are likely to suffer severe and long-standing impacts from the pandemic. We believe there is a genuine risk of the lockdown generation who actually will be scared throughout their working lives. This is why the ILO called for urgent and large-scale and targeted policy responses to support the youth through greater efforts to boost the quality and delivery of online distance learning and the employment and training guarantee programs and social protection and unemployment insurance benefit, and stronger complementarity between these policies with the mental health services, psychological support, and the sports activities. And last but not least, to step up the protection of young people's human rights. I want to add this study was made possible thanks to the support of the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, and the ISEC, and European Youth Forum, and the European Union Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioners for Human Rights, as well as our partners of the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth. I would be happy to discuss any questions and comments with you. As Rosalie indicated, I'm now with my colleagues from all the regions, Marcus, Felix, and Caroline, as well as Susan, who actually played a leading role in this global survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sang-eun. I'll now open the floor for the journalists. So please put up your hand if you do have a question. Okay, so we have the first question already from Antonio Broto from FA News Agency, Spanish News Agency. Antonio, go ahead, please. Can you unmute Antonio? Okay, I think he's there.
Hello, good afternoon. So I start with a quite general question. Are we in the risk of having a lost generation in education and labor market because of the COVID-19?
Rosalie, can I respond or?
Yes, Sang-eun, please go ahead. Yes, please go ahead and answer, Sang-eun.
Thank you. The quick answer to your question on the lost generation. Of course, I mean, we are living in a very uncertain and the very rapidly evolving world of work at the moment. So whatever we say is far from certain. But all we can say at this stage is all the data, all the analysis, and all the development relating to young people indicating to one direction, which is definitely this is going to be unprecedented, massive impacts on the young people in terms of the job availability and job opportunity, not only the short term right now, but also long term as well. As I said, one of the unique actually feature of this crisis is that the young people are faced with both the issues relating both a labor demand, lack of the work opportunity on the one hand, at the same time, there are a huge disruption in education training. So which basically means young people, even when actually there will be new job opportunity coming up as the part of the post-crisis recovery, they may not be ready to actually take those opportunities. So which actually created really systematic and also large scale impact on the young people. We know from the evidence, and also we know from the experience from the many different crises, that the young people who may not have a good chance to have the access to job opportunity when they are very young or the very entry stage of the labor market, the consequences will continue. It's just not the one-shot game, continue with the rest of their working lives. So that's what we call scarring effects. And overall, we think there are really genuine high risk of these actually scarring effects for many young people this time. And so that's why we are calling for a very systematic, actually massive policy intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangon. Our next question is from Jamil Chade, a Brazilian journalist. Jamil, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. My question is about Latin America. If your specialist on Latin America could step in. My question, I mean, this is a global study, but do you have the equivalent numbers for Latin America or for Brazil itself? And whether do you think that, you know, comparison to other regions, how does Latin America compare? I'm asking this question because nobody lives in the world. People live in their cities and live in their neighborhoods and live in their countries. So it's very hard to understand what it is 1 in 6 if that is not the reality in their own countries. So if you could, you know, zoom in a little bit more, in my case in Latin America, but maybe other regions of the world as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamil. I think Susanna will answer this question for you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Jamil. So indeed, your question is very relevant. Unfortunately, the scope of the survey will not allow us to give representative details at regional level. So that's why some of these findings, we want to keep them at the global level. We have made some series of disaggregation by income level, so we can see how lower income countries compare to higher income countries. So particularly on the findings of the survey, we will refrain ourselves from making regional estimates or suggestions. Nevertheless, I want to point to the information the office provided in the latest monitor, ILO monitor, where we actually, when we were talking about the impact of the pandemic in the hours of work and how much how much has had that impact been, we refer to a 14% decrease in working hours, which will be correlated to about 400 million jobs lost. And what we saw from that report is that actually Latin America was the region with the greatest reduction in working hours. So we estimated back last month that in actually the whole of the Americas, 18.3%, there will be a reduction in 18.3% in working hours. And this is particularly acute in South America, where the estimate is around 20.6%. Now, how does this relate to youth? As Sangon mentioned before, what we have seen from experiences from previous crises is that whenever there is a recession, the heat of that recession, that economic recession on youth employment, or let's say unemployment, that heat is harder among young people than among adults. And what is also important to note is that it's not only that heat that is much more harder among young people, it also stays with them for the longer term. So based on these estimates, we can say that indeed the impact is massive. As you may have seen from the recent reports from the Economic Commission for Latin America, we also note that a large amount of, around 50% of workers in Latin America are in the informal economy. So if we think about 3/4 of young workers being in the informal economy as well and being hard hit because of that lack of social protection, lack of security, then we can find different transmission channels by which the pandemic will impact our societies, the cities, and particularly taking into account those regional contexts and specificities.
Thank you, Susanna. We'll move to the next question from Lisa Schlein from Voice of America. Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you, Rosalind. Yes, I'd like to ask a question specifically about your findings in Africa, and in particular, most of the work that youth have available to them traditionally, and those who have sort of aged out of that category, is in the informal sector. So I'm wondering whether the lasting effects in terms of job opportunities will be less for them than in other parts of the world where perhaps more employment exists within the sort of structured labor market.
Thanks, Lisa. Caroline will answer that one.
Thank you, Lisa, for your question. The study makes reference to exactly the question that you're raising, but compared to the high-income countries where the impact on unemployment has been quite dramatic, the figures that we have around informality in Africa may not exactly indicate the impact, the level on employment, as it were. What do I mean? As you said, we have a lot of people in the informal economy, and that means that as we look at what the impact has been, we do not have a very clear picture compared to markets where we have clear data. And so it's still an evolving situation in the continent. Of course, the information around
Oh, I think we may have lost Caroline. Caroline, could you continue? Caroline, can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry, do you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, but we lost you for a few moments, actually. So maybe you could just go back slightly.
Yes, thank you. I was referencing the fact that most of the African youth work in the informal economy, and the impact of the current pandemic on that sector, as much as we can see that many have lost jobs, many businesses have closed, we're still not able to completely quantify that as much as we are able to in the high income countries. And this is something that is continuing to evolve, and different countries are also putting in place measures to respond to the impact of the pandemic on the informal sector.
Thank you, Caroline. Hang on, go ahead, yes.
Thank you. I think Lisa's question is very, very important. So there is also an important aspect of this crisis. As you know very well, during the crisis, economic and social, whatever crisis, the informal employment normally is the last resort of employment, and also the income sources. So that's why actually even in many cases, in a typical crisis, in Africa in particular, even during the crisis, you don't see much changes in employment itself. Actually, unemployment somehow remains actually very stable despite of crisis, because the people rely on the informal employment as a last resort. But now, this option is not readily available at the moment because all the informal, commercial or sales, whatever activities are heavily affected by the lockdown or related restrictive measures. So they cannot use these informal activities as basis for their survival strategy. That's why we are very much worried about the income losses and also poverty implication for these people who actually typically rely on the informal activities. So that's why we are calling for the many governments to provide very strong and rapid the income support for these informal workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangon. Are there any other questions to our experts? And just to remind you that we have experts who are covering Asia, Felix Weidenkauf from Bangkok, and we also have Marcus Pilgrim, who covers the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, as well as you've already heard from Caroline as well, covering Africa. I have a question from Alexander Weber of Bloomberg. Go ahead, please, with your question.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I was just wondering, could you go into detail a little bit on the disproportionate nature of the impact on the youth? I mean, what are the main ways in which it differs from the impact on the general population? Is it mainly education or also in the fields of unemployment? Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Rosalie, is it me?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Sang-on. Yeah, whoever wants to take the question.
Yeah, so probably Susanna is also very well placed to respond to these questions as well. There are many things actually happening which actually somehow creating actually disproportionate impacts on the young people. The first one is the overall job structure for the young people. As you know very well, the young people tends to be concentrated more on the service-related jobs, and this service actually, especially some part of the service sectors are really hit very hard by this actual pandemic. So in terms of the job opportunity, purely by the structure of the job market for young people are very, very vulnerable. That's number one. Number two is that probably you remember very well about the creating job opportunity for young people through the new types of employment or non-standard forms of employment, including gig economy and other related forms of employment. Those jobs were also hit very hard, and also, as you know very well, these jobs tends to be relatively more precarious or unstable compared to the other jobs. So in terms of the types of job actually young people normally have are also somehow creating a contribution to making the overall situation much more challenging for young people. This is about the related to the job labor market. Third thing is more long-term. Actually, this kind of thing happen all the time. I mean, whenever we have a crisis, young people are always hit harder than the other age group. We know that. But this time, we are also more worried about the midterm and long-term actually implication because the huge disruption in the training education. So already there are lots of debate going on in Europe and in many parts of the world. I know this Asia and also in Europe as well, whether or not the online, this actually some kind of this year's educational performance and how the education or training are organized during the pandemic, how this will eventually impact the young people who will come to the labor market, say next year or in 2 years of time. That is a really big question. Will they be really ready for the new job opportunity, or their qualification or education attainment will be fully recognized by the employers and appreciated by the industry? That's a really open question. If there is some question where the qualification, education side, or the quality of education, or other training, education related issues, on top of the rather challenging job labor market structure for young people, if we can put them together, this actually disproportionate impact we already start to see will continue in the years to come. So, Susanna, actually over to you for further details.
Thank you, Sang-on. So indeed, when it comes to age, we see that younger youth are much more vulnerable than older youth and adults. For example, as regards to occupations. So as the older you are, the greater the likelihood that your occupation will be more stable and therefore less vulnerable. But let me delve into, for example, the findings for mental well-being. So what we see is, in particular for the survey, we managed to compare the age bracket of 18 to 29-year-old versus the age bracket of 30 to 34. And just by comparing these age ranges, what we see is that those 18 to 29 actually have a greater probability or propensity to have a probable state of anxiety and depression versus those that are above 30. So this is one of those aspects of many times we don't observe so closely, and this survey has given us the opportunity to capture some information about young people's mental well-being. Another element around the age differentiation, or how COVID-19 impacts differently younger versus adult population, is also through the innate disadvantages or inherited disadvantage that young workers have in the labor market. Oftentimes we speak about the catch-22 that young people face, which is a paradox by which young people are asked to have work experience, but they will not have work experience if they don't get their first job. So this sort of paradox we expect now to be exacerbated because of the crisis, because of the closing in vacancies and lack of jobs, and then making young people transition to the labor market much more difficult and arduous. Versus older workers who can already come with a greater work experience and a much, I would say, beautiful CV vis-a-vis young people that very often just lack that time of exposure in the labor market.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Okay, do we have any other questions from the journalists? I don't see any, but I'll just give you a few more minutes in case you do have questions. And just to remind you that, you know, if after the briefing you do want to do any separate interviews with our experts, they will be available in and be able to do the interviews in English, French, and Spanish. Okay, I see no other questions. So I think that we'll wrap up there. So many thanks for taking part in this virtual press conference, and to Sang Only and our experts. And just a reminder that the embargo lifts this evening at 2000 Geneva time, which is 1800 GMT. You do have all the materials. Please let me know if you need anything else. So until the next time, goodbye. Thank you.